Morning, everyone. Yesterday morning at 6:20 a.m., CBC posted federal carbon pricing law unconstitutional, Alberta Court of Appeals rules. So that's big news, but it's not the Supreme Court. There's still steps to be taken, but interesting, right? Here we go. The federal government carbon tax has been ruled unconstitutional by the Court of Appeal of Alberta on the grounds that it intrudes on provincial jurisdiction. The 4-1 decision released Monday rejects Ottawa's argument that regulation of greenhouse gases emissions is an issue of national concern, citing the division of powers in the Constitution that gives the provinces the responsibility for non-renewable resources. The majority opinion called the Greenhouse Gas Pollution Pricing Act a constitutional Trojan horse. It says the legislation contains no limits on the scope of the federal government's power. Quote, what is authorized under the act indefinitely into the future and in the sole unfettered discretion of the executive is endlessly expansive, the decision says. The executive's authority is also open-ended and largely subjective. What that means is it's not very clear what they can do and what they can't do. It's up to an interpretation of opinion. That's what subjective means, largely subjective, right? And it says that while unfettered discretion of the executive is excessively expansive, means they can decide to do anything they want, and they can say, see, this law says we can. So that's what this decision says. Very interesting, right? Back to the article. Quote, copious for its breadth, the act allows the federal government to intrude further into more and different aspects of lawful daily life, both personal and business. Nor is there anything in the act limiting what the federal government can choose to levy in the future, both on people and industry. The minimums of today are not the maximums of tomorrow. That means if right now the per pound price for the carbon tax is $20, well, that could go up to $200 under this, and that would still be lawful, and that would cripple most people, right? You can't have a tax that's that high, but people will say they won't do that. Well, it's already happening. People who are just on Social Security, elderly people who can't keep up with rent and food and hydro, that's happening already. I need you to understand it, right? Like, you think that the government would never turn a blind eye to people who are suffering in Canada, and I'm telling you, they are enthusiastically, while telling those people they should think about opening up their homes to ease the housing situation for the increased population they keep telling us we need, while we can't take care of our own, right? You think that the government could not possibly be that cold-hearted, and I'm telling you, anyone over the age of 65 is a number that costs increasing amounts of money to the government. Okay? Okay. So, just in case you're unsure, they turn a blind eye. They do. Back to the article. The ruling is seen as a victory by Alberta's governing United Conservative Party, which campaigned on a promise to challenge the federal carbon tax in court. Premier Jason Kenney hailed the court's decision in a speech to his caucus and government staffers in Edmonton on Monday afternoon. This is a great victory for Alberta and a victory for Canadian federalism, Kenney said. We will take this decision with us as we stand up for our allies in Ontario, Saskatchewan, and Quebec at the Supreme Court of Canada next month. Kenney claimed the carbon tax, which came into effect in Alberta on January 1st, was now illegal thanks to the ruling. The federal government imposed the tax after Kenney's UPC government repealed Alberta's own consumer carbon tax shortly after coming into power last spring. We expect the government of Canada to comply with the order of the court today and to remove the federal carbon tax on Albertans, Kenney said. While the Alberta Court of Appeal ruling found the federal legislation to be unconstitutional, it's not clear the federal government is obliged to suspend the tax pending a Supreme Court decision. The Alberta Court of Appeal is the first provincial appeal court to rule against the legislation. Appeal courts in Saskatchewan and Ontario upheld the law in split decisions. And there's a bit more to that. Link is in the description if you want to have a read. Here's Jason Kenney himself talking about this. It's about a minute long, and we'll listen to all of it. Here we go.
But let me be clear about why we're fighting so hard against the federal carbon tax. First, we disagree with Ottawa that a one-size-fits-all consumer tax that punishes families for heating their homes or driving to work is the best way to reduce emissions. We categorically reject that. Even Ottawa admits that to be effective, their tax would have to rise from the current $30 a ton to something like $200 or $300 a ton. They've never been fully honest with Canadians about that, and there's a good reason for it. They know that if they were to increase the carbon tax by 1,000%, by tenfold, that it would push hardworking Canadian families into energy poverty and that there would be a tax revolt. Well, we stand with hardworking families from coast to coast in standing up for their budgets, their ability to put food on the table, their ability to heat their homes, their ability to take kids to hockey practice and to live normal lives. We do not believe Canadians in this cold northern country should be punished for simply living normal lives.
Well done. A good politician can boil something down to something that you can relate to. And Jason Kenney framing the carbon tax as essentially taxing your everyday life. You don't have an option whether you use your gas heating. You don't have an option whether you fill up your car to take your kid to hockey practice. Most transit doesn't work out that way. Most cities don't have the infrastructure, right? So, and if you've got an out-of-town game, what then? Right? So there are things that cars are necessary for. There are things there is no alternative for. And really, the alternative in my city anyway, if I didn't have a car and wanted to go out for lunch with somebody, it would take 3 hours, right? An hour to get there by bus, and then an hour for the lunch, let's say, and an hour to get home by bus. Whereas I could do it in about an hour and 15, hour and 20 minutes in a car, right? That is a big difference. That's not an option. Right? And families just make it more complicated, right? If you've got dance or something else that has an off the beaten track location, not on a bus route maybe, or inconveniently on a bus route, does it make sense to leave your car at home? It has to be better. I said this about when video stores, sorry, I'm going off on a bit of a tangent, but when video stores and pirating was kind of new in 2003 or 2004, when you could easily get a movie online, right? After Napster kind of blew the music industry apart, then that happened to movies. And fundamentally, like, I said that the industry had to do it better than the pirates were offering. And that's the same here. The idea that people can be scared out of their cars into inefficient transit, and the transit has to be inefficient because we have to serve everybody or something to that effect, is just folly. It has to be better than the alternative in order to make people move. And what's happened, the reality of what's happened is transit ridership is not increasing. Car ownership, van ownership, truck ownership is increasing. The reason for that is the increasing population. And it just bothers me that people think that you can just tell people, do this, don't do that, and they're going to do it. That's not how humans work, right? It's just not how humans work. So I think that that's important to think about. And with, something like a carbon tax, when there is no alternative, there is nothing else to choose, such as you've got an out-of-town game with, a couple kids or whatever, maybe a carpool, but it doesn't make sense, right? It doesn't make sense to en masse get rid of our cars for this boogeyman that is unprovable. And now it's being, using the denier term like a Holocaust denier or something, and they're trying to make parallels there. And it's just wild to watch all this happen. But sorry if I've gone off on a bit of a tangent. I apologize. Moving on back to Canadian news and back to what Mr. Kenney is talking about. This is in Ontario, but Global News is reporting yesterday morning, OPP arrest multiple protesters at the Mohawk rail blockade. I watched these videos. I thought, I think the police are in a bad situation trying to enforce the laws of the land with a prime minister who's saying one thing but implying something else. It's very interesting. Like, it's not good to watch, but I don't envy the police on the ground having to actually make this a reality. It's not easy. And so, you've got a bunch of people who are on railway tracks. Fundamentally, the officers are just people, right? Like, they're just people standing there to do a job to make sure that the country runs. Without them, the country doesn't run. So there we go. But, the protesters are making their case. They're saying, we don't want to move, blah, 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 blah. And man, it doesn't look fun. It doesn't look fun. So it's a shame that we've got to this situation. It's a shame that our leadership have been so inefficient and ineffectual to have let Canada get into this situation, that there's flare-ups. This morning there's chaos all across Toronto because there's fires on tracks and protesters on tracks and all sorts of stuff. I wish that the police officers would just impose the law as it's written and not second guess anything because they think that they might get pulled in and get called racist by the media and sanctioned by their boss or whatever, right? And it's for doing their job, right? Even if there are extenuating circumstances, the needs of the nation in this case, the railways, the businesses, all that stuff, the goods need to move, right? It's just really interesting that they're second guessing this rule of law. And the reason is the leadership. And well, here's Jason Kenney, CTV News, back to Alberta, not Hamilton. This is this morning at 6:27 a.m. Today's February 25th. Kenney bring in stiff penalties against railway blockaders as Alberta legislature resumes. I mean, could Doug Ford do this? Probably. He's got a majority, right? Alberta politicians will return to the legislature. I said that bad twice. That legislature Tuesday, and the UCP government is taking aim at protesters who interfere with major energy projects. Premier Kenney is expected to table the Critical Infrastructure Defense Act, Bill 1, which will target protesters who set up blockades and create stiffer penalties for anyone who seeks to impair critical economic infrastructure, including railways. The province has been critical of blockades in support of the Wet'suwet'en First Nation opposition on the Coastal GasLink pipeline project in British Columbia. Again, I don't understand why they're giving these protesters the credibility of the Wet'suwet'en First Nation name. The Wet'suwet'en First Nation elected chiefs all approved this project. The only people who don't are some rogue hereditary chiefs who have no official standing within their group. So what's the deal, newspaper? What's the deal, CTV? You can't read? Seriously, get some editors who understand what's going on. Back to the article. Kenney says blockades have cost jobs and hurt the economy. We need national leadership to ensure that Canada is a country characterized by the rule of law, said Kenney. We are pleased to see that action is finally being taken by police services to enforce court orders, but Alberta will do its part. Kenney adds that the protests have been in part to blame for Teck Resources withdrawing its application for the $20.6 billion Frontier oil sands mine project. Yeah. So lots going on within the context of Alberta, lots going on nationwide within the context of rail disruptions and rail protests. And hey, but with that as a backdrop, why not bring in some coronavirus too? Here it is, CBC reporting yesterday at 2:35 p.m. Canada prepares pandemic response plan as coronavirus cases continue to climb. And this is globally, not in Canada. As far as our official numbers, we're still at 9. We got one more in Toronto. And they were on an airplane though, right? So I don't know about the people on the airplane. I hope they're not coming to my city. Back to this. Chief Public Health Officer Theresa Tam said the global threat posed by novel coronavirus, which can lead to a respiratory illness called COVID-19, is evolving fast. While the outbreak continues to be contained mostly to the epicenter in Hubei, China, she noted that the virus is spreading now at community level, person to person, in several other communities. It should be restored soon. Oh, sorry, that was just me saying the CCP talking points, which is exactly what this is. It's mostly contained to the epicenter in Hubei, China. That's like verbatim CCP talking points. That's really interesting to note, okay? It's really interesting to note. Moving on. Quote, these signs are concerning, and they mean that the window of opportunity for containment, for stopping the global spread of the disease virus, is closing, Tam told reporters in a teleconference Monday. It also tells countries like Canada that have been able to manage and detect cases so far that we have to prepare across governments, across communities and families and individuals in the event of more widespread transmission in our community. The World Health Organization, WHO, has declared the outbreak a public health emergency of international concern, but so far hasn't declared it a pandemic. I just wanted to point out again, yesterday I looked at the WHO classifications for pandemic in 2009 for the H1N1, and we're certainly in phase 4 and probably phase 5, but phase 4 is characterized by verified human-to-human transmission of an animal or human-animal influenza reassortant virus able to cause community-level outbreaks. The ability to cause sustained disease outbreaks in a community makes a significant upward shift in the risk for a pandemic. Right, and there's multiple examples of person-to-person contact, spreading disease, and very, very contagious, and in multiple countries. Like we've got Iran, South Korea, Italy, and more, Singapore, right? That's 4 just off the top of my head, and I'm sure there's outbreaks in other cities. And the reasons that we're not seeing more, and the United States, the reasons we're not seeing more is the bar is set very high for testing. You have to have been in contact with somebody from China or from the region. So, man, isn't this it? Like, it's so interesting. It seems just incredibly poorly mismanaged, right? It just seems wild, so badly managed. Back to the article. Tam said the trajectory of the coronavirus is unknown at this time, and it's possible that cases have occurred in other countries that don't have the proper tools to diagnose and contain it. Canada developed a pandemic response plan in 2009, which would serve as the foundation for any shift in the official response to the current outbreak, she said. The response plan includes accelerating research work here and contributing to international efforts to develop a vaccine abroad. Tam said it also could lead to expanding laboratory testing capabilities and access to diagnostic tools and taking stock of essential supplies to make sure authorities don't run short. She added that Canada's course of action would be much the same whether the WHO declares a pandemic or not. Health Minister Patty Haydu said Monday that a pandemic declaration by the WHO would render travel restrictions meaningless because it would mean that the effort to contain the virus had failed. As the window closes in terms of stopping the global spread, as we watch the WHO assess whether or not this is a full pandemic, obviously our attention turns more towards our domestic preparedness and what Canada can do to make sure our system and structures are ready for a change in our own population. A change in our own population, she said. The WHO said today that China has reported 77,362 cases of COVID-19, including 2,618 deaths. The epidemic peaked between January 23rd and February 2nd. It has been steadily declining since, he said. Well, day 21 is February 2nd. Is that peak? That's peak according to the CBC and according to the president of the WHO. No, it is not peak. And I don't think we're at peak yet. We're seeing this level off, but I don't think we're at peak yet. We're still going. I mean, we're not going strong, but I think that if we were testing other countries, and I don't know, I think that there's holes in that and massive glaring holes. Remember the big yellow plane Baloo flew in Tailspin? Like, able to fly that plane through. Okay, back to the article. Quote, for the moment, we are not witnessing the uncontrolled global spread of the virus, and we are not witnessing large-scale severe disease or death, he said. Have you guys also seen that video of Wuhan at night? I don't have the link right now. I'm not going to play it, but if people want it, I'll put it up. Okay, if he says so, but see this big, fat, hairy lie. So take this one with a grain of salt. Back to the article, I scroll down. Tam said enhanced border control measures and messaging at airports will be brought in to include warnings to travelers returning from other countries with reported cases of coronavirus. She said international travelers arriving at Canadian airports will be told to self-isolate if they're experiencing flu-like symptoms. Tam said all travelers should take general precautions and plan ahead by, for instance, making sure they have enough medications for a trip. She repeated the standard public health message encouraging people to wash their hands frequently, cover their coughs, sneezes, keep track of federal travel health advice posted online, and share travel history with healthcare providers in the event of becoming sick. And it just seems like such an under response. Here's the Ottawa Citizen reporting Canadians being told to prepare for a possible novel coronavirus pandemic. This is a different doctor. Quote, we're coming to similar conclusions as Miss Tam, as the official health, the chief medical officer of health. Okay. Agreed Dr. Vera Etches, the city of Ottawa's top health officer, on Monday. Quote, it looks like it's going to be more and more difficult to contain this virus, and it may well evolve into a pandemic. That would change the efforts to contain every last case and contact. Etches said people can take steps now at home and at work to prepare. Some of those steps include stocking up on needed prescriptions ahead of time, so there's no need to do so during a possible pandemic. She also recommended people stock up on non-perishable foods. Imagine if someone was ill for a week. What would you need? Well, not non-perishable food. She said that there are ongoing discussions about setting up an assessment center outside of hospitals to reduce pressure on the healthcare system. Right, don't go to a hospital. Go to this factory we've set up here with beds and just, hang out there until you're done. It just, again, the whole thing seems like scattershot. It seems like nobody who knows really what's going on is in charge, and the people who know really what's going on are not telling these people. So that's what I think. But hey, I'm just a guy in my garage. So thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for watching. Check out CanadaPoly.com and CanadaReport.co, and have a wonderful, wonderful day. Ooh, and I barely kept it under 20 minutes.